Welcome, LA Progressive friends and family. Dick and I are excited again to have Bill Blum with us. And Bill Blum, he joins us regularly. And I was asking him before we pressed the record button how he felt about writing about such dire times. Does it have an impact on him? And he says it does. And I don't know if you want to expand upon that, Bill. But Bill is a former judge and a death penalty defense attorney. So it seems like you're just a glutton for punishment. How are you?
It does, doesn't it? So reflecting on what's happening on campus, which is what we talked about off camera, I'm a veteran of the 60s and the anti-war movement in 1968, and I remember those days very vividly. I just want to, there's a lot of people who are making direct comparisons between now and 68, and there are many, many to be had, but it's not exactly the same situation, nor could it be. History doesn't really repeat. As the saying goes, it rhymes. Back in those days, we faced, I think, greater hostility from the powers that be. We didn't have the right to vote. We had a draft. Two of my brothers were drafted. I had a high lottery number. It's the only reason I didn't get. I wasn't forced to make a choice between running, going to prison, or going to Vietnam. So I see similarities, I see differences, and I think it's really interesting. I'm happy to see students get motivated. When I taught at USC, one of my biggest complaints was student apathy. I would try to get them interested in major issues, and except for a handful, I came up empty most of the time. Now things are changing. So I see a lot of good, and but a lot of trouble ahead, because and this is one of the similarities between now and 68, is that we've got a choice between an outright fascist and Donald Trump. We had Richard Nixon then, and we have kind of a neoliberal, uninspiring but not a crazy person in Joe Biden. We had Hubert Humphrey back then. People can look him up if you weren't alive then. And it was a stark choice. And Richard Nixon won. And Richard Nixon, went through Watergate. And we had the movement back then sort of taken over to a certain extent by extremists within the movement. You had the Weathermen destroying SDS. I could go on and on. I went to a conference in 1971 at Hunter College in New York. It was one of the last big hurrahs of SDS, but it was invaded by Weathermen, and we had Vance Harkey, a senator from Indiana, a Democrat, who had evolved into an anti-war person, but the SDS component wouldn't let him talk. This was a packed auditorium. There must have been 1,500, maybe 2,000 people there, and it degenerated into a Pier 1 brawl. I mean, just like the movies, just like you see in an old Gary Cooper movie. I was in the back of the auditorium, so I didn't get any punches thrown my way, but it was just crazy. And so the reason why this is relevant, you got to keep your eyes on the prize and not let extremists on either side dismay you or dissuade you from what really is the true goal. So I'm happy in some ways to see all this, but I'm cautious and keeping my eyes on everything, as I know everybody is.
I apparently am just about your age. I participated in the anti-war protests as a veteran. Actually, I'd been to Vietnam,
Yeah,
and which gave me a different perspective. A lot of people of our ilk are excited that there's student activism on the campuses. But the big outgrowth of what happened in 68 and on was really the reaction, the rise of the Powell memo and the 40-year plan, and we're reaping the benefits of that. And I fear that the same kind of, if the students are waking up, the troglodytes are waking up too, and that there will be a long-lasting counter-revolution, and we'll pay a price for that, perhaps.
And I'm a little bit younger than both of you, but
as you often remind me.
I do remind you.
Well, that's a good thing.
But From my perspective, I actually was alive in 1968, and I do vaguely remember the civil unrest. I remember the riots in the ghetto. I'm from the Bronx and lived just maybe a mile away from Harlem. As a child, I remember a lot of the civil unrest that went on in the 60s. But what I'd say, looking from that vantage point as a child, and a child that grew up to be a very engaged, deeply immersed in the news, I'd say that one of our biggest failings, and it's showing up right now, is that we don't use our educational system to teach civic engagement. So they say that, riots are the language of those that are unheard. This is how they find their voice. But there are other ways for them to find their voices, but we don't talk about that. And I think we do that to our detriment. So anyway, we did want to talk to you today about this, how the Supreme Court might rescue Trump and this latest Supreme Court hearing. You want to talk a little bit about that, Bill?
Well, for sure. And I think that they're directly related, because one of the differences between then and now is that then we looked at the Supreme Court as a guardian of our civil liberties and our civil rights. We don't do that anymore, and for good reason. And there are two cases that were just argued this month, which underscore what I think is now the undeniable fact that this court has been taken over by the radical right, and it's likely not to change. This is the court that I wrote in the last article for Truth Did, which overturned Roe, which gutted the Voting Rights Act, and which, through its reinterpretation of the Second Amendment, has turned our country into a legalized shooting gallery. There's no reason to expect this court to save us from the biggest demagogue who to hold the Oval Office since before the Civil War. And those two cases are Fisher versus the United States and Trump versus the United States, and they deal with overlapping issues. And just to summarize, Fisher is a man named Joseph Fisher, who's a police officer from a small town, a small township in Pennsylvania, who participated violently in the January 6th insurrection. And he and a couple of other fellow insurrectionists have an appeal which directly attacks the way that the court, the Supreme Court, will interpret the statute that prohibits obstruction of an official proceeding, including the January 6th joint session of Congress to certify the new winner in the presidential elections. So he's attacking that statute as applied to violent protests. And then the other case involving Trump as the defendant and then the petitioner involves whether or not a former president should be given immunity from criminal prosecution for acts undertaken while he was president. So the way they overlap is that two of the four charges in special counsel Jack Smith's indictment of President Trump are the same statutes that Joseph Fisher in the first case is attacking in his situation. And that's a statute which is found in Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1512, subsection C, 1 and 2. And both of these cases together, from a legal standpoint, show the hypocrisy of the Supreme Court's adherence to what we call textualism for interpreting statutes and originalism for what we call the interpretation of constitutional provisions. So textualism is center stage in Joseph Fisher's case, and textualism says, interpret statutes according to their ordinary plain meaning, and don't read anything else into them, and don't worry about the consequences or what Congress's intent may have been. So what that statute says is that it's a felony to alter, destroy, or otherwise change evidence, documentary evidence in connection with an official proceeding, or otherwise corruptly intend to disrupt the proceeding. So the whole decision turns on whether or not the word otherwise should be read to include violent efforts to disrupt an official proceeding. And you would think that the ordinary language of that word otherwise used in that statute would encompass the behavior of these insurrectionists. And most courts that have dealt with this charge, and there are about 170 people who have been charged under this statute, January 6th insurrectionists, most courts have held the statute applies to them. But in Fisher's case, he drew a judge that was appointed by Trump who interpreted it differently. The statute was enacted in the aftermath of the Enron financial scandal, when Enron was cooking its books to entice investors and then doing a classic pump and dump on them and making tons of money, providing no services. So this judge said, no, this only relates to documentary evidence. And so he dismissed the two charges against Fisher and two other insurrectionists. And now that case is on appeal. And so now it's before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court looks like they're going to throw out those charges against Mr. Fisher and his cohorts, which will affect 170 cases, many of which have already been adjudicated, and people have been sentenced for this under this statute. It could affect the two counts in Smith's indictment of Trump, although it's possible to read them as documentary counts, because after all, what Smith is accusing Trump of doing is creating fake electoral certificates. So that's evidentiary in nature. So Smith might be saved, but we don't know that. So if he isn't, that scuttles half of Smith's case. So then you turn to the immunity case, in which the court is saying, you know what? We can't just throw out Trump's claim because we think there's something to it. We think we have to protect future presidents who would be targeted by their opponents if they don't leave office peacefully, which is exactly what Trump did. And the targeting only occurred after he refused to leave office peacefully. So it's an inverted kind of Orwellian logic. But you have at least 4 justices who seem to be leaning in Trump's favor, and John Roberts in the middle, and then surprisingly, Amy Coney Barrett and the 3 liberals who are coming up with a test, with a theory that would hold that the president isn't above the law, and we have to make him subject to criminal prosecution if he breaks the law, under the old adage, that no one is above the law. So this is hanging in the balance, and it looks like it's going to come down to Chief Justice John Roberts, who some people want to look to as a hero and an institutionalist, but I don't think he really is. I think he's one of the gang of conservatives, and he, after all, is the one who gutted the Voting Rights Act in that 2013 decision called Shelby County versus Holder. So we're in a bad situation, and what we're looking at, possibly, and I'm afraid of, is the death of the rule of law in real time. We're seeing it dissipate. And if the Supreme Court does come up with a rule which says, okay, we're not going to hold Trump as absolutely immune under all circumstances, but we are going to want him to be immune for his official acts as opposed to his personal conduct, then we're going to have to send the case back to the district court to try to make that distinction, which may be impossible to make, which will mean at a minimum there will be no trial for the insurrection before the election, which means that if Trump wins, and right now he's got a pretty good chance of winning, and despite everything, which gets back to how we started this conversation, in part because of Biden's unbridled support of Israel's operation in Gaza, you have a Trump presidency, and he'll just quash the federal prosecutions and do whatever he can to stall the New York and Georgia cases, until he's out of office. So it's really a dire situation. And all the pundits who thought that, oh, the Supreme Court will save us in this case because Trump's position is really laughable, they're being proved wrong. And alarmists such as myself look like we have a lot of credibility right now, and we are all very worried. And so you asked me off camera if this bothers me emotionally and psychologically, and yes, it does. It causes me actually to lose sleep at night. That's where we are, and I want people to understand the gravity of the moment, because we are really all in this together, and we have to find a way to pull together to save what's best about this country and to move forward and to improve the situation for the vast majority of people who are being, quite frankly, to use the colloquial, screwed by the powers that be.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were blessed actually to listen to the full conversation last Thursday, which was really fascinating. I think that was a real service. But
you're talking about the Supreme Court hearing.
Yeah, the Supreme Court hearing and the conversation back and forth about immunity. And what was remarkable in both these cases is how, if you want to, you can torture the meaning of words beyond all belief. And as you point out in the article, I mean, a couple of the things that the president might be immune from is, say, he might want to assassinate an opponent with the SEAL Team 6, and his lawyer argued under certain contexts that might be right. And I do hear, we watch the talking heads, and there's a lot of hope that John Rogers and Amy Coney Barrett will somehow make some kind of sense, but it doesn't seem to line up with what's been going on.
Right. You mean John Roberts. So, you know, as our friend Jody Arma, who's a professor at USC Law School, always reminds us that the work of lawyers, the work of the law, is word work. So it just about seems to me that anyone can reinterpret the meaning of most words. Language is very changeable and liquid, and really,
right. It's just like Lewis Carroll's Humpty Dumpty. Humpty Dumpty said, when I use words, they mean exactly what I choose them to mean. And years ago, an argument before the Supreme Court that staging a military coup or assassinating your opponents might give you immunity from prosecution would be laughed out of court. And a lawyer would be ashamed to make those arguments. The mere fact that he's making them signals a sea change. The mere fact that Clarence Thomas is sitting on this case when his wife, by all accounts, participated as a behind-the-scenes insurrectionist, is horrendous and shocking. And what the court is doing is delegitimizing itself. And surely at some level they know that. But many of the justices, or at least some of them, like Alito and Thomas, don't care about that. They don't care about it at all. So the hope is that the institutionalists on the bench, even the right-wing ones, will come up with some sort of compromise to hold presidents to account, because, and this gets back to something that we discussed off the record, if they don't, and Trump wins, and his people who are smart, he's stupid, but his people are smart, and they try to implement the Project 2025 agenda, we're going to see mass deportations in this country of 11 million people. We're going to see the National Guard called in to quash protests that are going to make what's happened at UCLA look like a tea party. And it's important for us to get out the word to as many people as we can so that we can act intelligently and try to build up a movement which is based on the old principles of universality, that everybody who agrees that we need inclusive, and multicultural democracy in this country have to pull together. And so we got to stop fighting among ourselves, because that's destroyed left-wing movements in this country before. And it might just do it again. So that's the task in front of us. And that's why I keep writing these articles and keep coming on your show. And I hope we're reaching some people. I know we are. And we just have to keep on doing it. And other people are doing it too. And we have to support them.
Absolutely, we do. We support independent media, but what I want to emphasize here is as much as hard as you work, Bill, and as hard as Dick and I work, our work means nothing if people do not share this content. So if you're watching this video and you appreciate the content, we ask that you like, we ask that you give it a thumbs up, we ask that you share, we ask that you use the social media icons that are at the bottom of this video where you can share it on Facebook, on Twitter, on Pinterest. And we ask that you subscribe. That really, in my mind, the media has fallen so short of doing what they need to do as the fourth estate. So it's really up to independent media like the LA Progressive, like Truth Out and Truth Dig, and The Nation, and Mother Jones, and there's a whole slew of them. But we're all underfunded and undersupported. So please like and share.
So one other thing I want to say. So Bill, you said your next topic might be writing about the 2025 plan, the plan that Trump's smarter aides are putting together. And it sounds like a kind of a mini Powell memo. It's like a comprehensive plan of.
Well, no, it's not a mini Powell memo. It's gigantic. It's 900 pages.
Oh, okay. Well, that's right. The Powell memo is only a handful of pages.
Yeah, 8 pages. Okay, so Bill, you're going to do a summary of that eventually, and we look forward to receiving that and then interviewing you about it. So
I'll be here.
It's time for us to wrap it up. Bill, thank you so much for joining us again, and for, as always, educating Dick and I and educating the LA Progressive readers. And again, please like and share. Bill Blum, it's good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sticking around. If you like the LA Progressive content and the discussions we have here, please consider clicking the subscribe button below, and also give us a thumbs up. That helps to grow our audience by feeding the algorithm, which helps to get this content in front of more eyes. Thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate your support.